All righty, thank you, gentlemen. And there's a lot of influence and work and experience in this room, and we want to help you capitalize it. And so our conversation over these two sessions will be strategic planning, moving ideas into practice. And before I start, I want to read a verse for you from Ephesians chapter 4, beginning at verse 11. And the context, Paul is talking about the church and what the Spirit has given us and how we operate. And it says, and he gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. And why did he give this leadership to the church? He said, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. And that's from the King James Version. And I want to read verse 12 again from the New International. And instead of perfecting, because that word throws some people off, think it's talking about somebody being perfect, but it's really talking about equipping. And so the NIV says, to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up. And so I want to just start this with the paradigm that for a church to be impactful, the layman must be engaged in ministry. Part of the old paradigm is that ministry is the work of the pastor, and that church growth and everything about the church is on his shoulder. But that's, according to the Bible, the wrong paradigm. The pastor's role, part of his major duty, is to equip lay people so that they can go out and do the works of ministry. And when that happens, then you see the church growing in every way. Members are maturing. Numbers are increases. Financial stewardship is up. In-reach is up. Outreach is up. Because the ministry multiplies every time a lay person get involved. And it multiplies by what that lay person does, but it also multiplies because then the lay people who become leaders, you bring other people in, and it multiplies. And so how do we harness then all of this equipping that the pastor does for the members and the lay people, and then the work that the lay people, how do we harness that and make it more impactful? And one of the ways you do that is by having a plan for ministry. And we call it, for the sake of this conference and what people do in churches and in the business world, you take time to develop a strategic plan. Strategic plan looks like this. When I left the hotel this morning, I put the address to here in my GPS, and it brought me here every step of the way. And so I ended up where I wanted to be. Because the plan was laid out in that GPS system. It was programmed. And I submit to you that your church will be wherever you plan it to be. Whatever you put in the system and whatever that system gives you in terms of a framework. And if you don't have a plan, you will end up anywhere. If you don't care about where you end up, then, don't have a plan. If you want your church to grow by 2%, then create a plan to grow by 2%. If you want to grow by 10%, create a plan for that. Our church is getting older, and by old I mean the membership, the average age. People are 65, 70. We don't have no young people. What are you doing other than talking about that? Is there a strategic plan to bring young people in? We don't have men in the church, and we just talk about that. Do you have a strategic plan, something other than talking, to bring them in? Our income is down, and we don't, do you have a strategic plan? COVID hit, and it changed the dynamics of our church. Most of us started doing the virtual thing, and so some members got comfortable. And now they are comfortable at Bedside Baptist. And so even though some of us have started assembling, they are not coming back. And then some of our members left and went to other churches because they were seeking some engagement. And there were churches that had some things going on. And so our members went to them. And they're not coming back. And we have a choice. We can vilify those members and talk about them for not coming back. And yeah, they're at Walmart. Yeah, they're in the grocery store. They're everywhere but church. But do you have a plan?
Yes, sir.
The places where they are frequenting had a plan to keep them in.
Right.
I shop at Publix. Publix had a plan to keep people coming. Target pivoted and had a plan to keep people buying, and their profits went up. I own their stock, so I know. Because they pivoted and created a plan to keep their customers engaged. And so the question is, do we have a strategic plan in our churches for laymen to do what we do to cause the church to grow? And I'm not going to read all of this to you, and we won't get through all of it, but I will give you enough to give you something to go home with. And anytime you got a question, you can stop me. And so the very first statement says, strategic planning, when used properly by a church, will result in a plan of action that moves ideas to practice. And that's where you start, with the idea. What are you envisioning? What are you dreaming for your church? And that idea needs to have a couple of elements for it to be impactful. One is, you've got to think God-sized ideas. And how do you know when it's a God-sized idea? God says, my ways are not your ways.
All right.
And my thoughts are not yours. As far as the heaven is from the earth, that's how wide the divide is. So if you simply come up with it on your own, that's an indication that it's not a God-sized idea.
All right.
Because he's already said, my ways are not your ways. And so that means this whole idea of planning begins with seeking God for ideas, seeking God for vision. And then God will give it to you. And so there needs to be some time by laymen spent in prayer. Not, us coming and just talking first, but seeking God for ideas. All right. And then secondly, here's another element. If your idea is an idea that you can easily implement because you've got the money, you've got the people, you've got the facilities, everything that you need, you already got to implement the ideas, that is not a God-sized idea.
All right.
It's too small. It's too small. Anytime God gives you a vision, it's going to be bigger than your capacity.
Yes, sir.
You ain't going to have enough money. You won't have enough people. You won't have the facility. You won't have it. And you don't get paralyzed in analysis because you don't have it. I have been blessed with a pretty significant congregation. We got a lot of people. And so many times I talk to pastors and they're coming, we have these conversations, they're throwing around ministry ideas and they throw their ideas out. And most of them usually say something like this: well, Pastor Simmons, if I had the members you had or members like you, then I could. And I say, you're so mistaken. You do have them like I have.
All right.
And it's not about the numbers. And it's not about who somebody is or what somebody does. It's about God giving you vision. And so these pastors don't do anything because they're counting people in the pews. They're counting their bank account, and then their members are the same. They don't want to make a move. And then when pastors talk and they do catch on fire and go back, and their members will say, well, we ain't Mount Zion. Stop talking to us like that. We can't do what they do. You can do more.
Yeah. All right.
And so you got to have some faith. And so how big are these ideas that you have? How big are they? I pastored Mount Zion now, but I pastored, my first church was in the rural area. On rainy days, sometimes we couldn't have church because you couldn't get there because it was in Terra County and it's some red clay. And I had 35 members. And we did things that that people, even members, thought we'd never do. With those folk, I had 5 deacons, only one could read. That one could read and write, and all the rest of them made an X with their name. But we grew. And I ain't bragging, but we were the most impactful church in terms of outreach in that area. Now they didn't have the best preacher, but in terms of impacting ministry, we did that. And at Mount Zion now, where I am with a lot of people and more, we have an after-school program, a tutorial program. But the largest and the most impactful after-school program I ever had was in a church I pastored before I got to Mount Zion that was in the country, and I had 250 members. And we partnered with the local school system. They gave us a whole elementary school. And after school every day, we had 300 to 400 kids and buses and all kind of stuff. And when we started that, there was no money, the church was in the country. We couldn't do an after school program out there. And come close to me when I say this, and it was Laymen led. And so if your idea is limited by your budget and your people, then it's not big enough. And then here's the last element. If the idea does not outlast you,
All right.
real vision, real ministry will live longer than us. There's this proverb that says, you got to be able to plant trees under whose shade you will never sit. The next generation will sit under that tree, but not you. But you plant it and you nurture it because you care about legacy, you care about the next generation. That's how big the ideas are. And so it starts with ideas, and there's some other things, but that's enough to to get us started. And so then you take those ideas and then you start developing the plan to move those ideas to practice, to reality. The second sentence says, those who have not been a part of strategic planning before may be asking questions like, what does strategic planning look like? How does it get completed? Or perhaps most importantly, how do you effectively use it? And of course, in this workshop, we'll look at some ways and strategies that you can take back to your church and engage in strategic planning. Okay. All right. And what you want to do when you start thinking about strategic planning is to look at a time span in which you will plan as we start talking about what it looks like. Pre-COVID, we used to talk about 5, 10, 20-year plan. In around 1999, 1998, 1999, we had what we call, as we took a couple years to put it together, a 2020 plan for Mount Zion. And that 2020 plan became a reality before 2020. But the things that we planned, and even more because God had made it bigger, and did that. And so you could plan 10, 20 years. But because of the environment that we're in now and everything being so uncertain, I'm suggesting that you may want to look at 3 to 5. Exactly. That's what y'all are doing in the business world?
Yes, sir.
3 to 5. Well, you don't be talking about 10. So you start with some ideas. What do we want to do? Who do we want to become? How do we want the church to look? What will ministry look like in 3 to 5 years? And then around that, you have goals, you have strategies, you have timelines, designated responsibilities that people have. And then at the end of those 3 years or 5 years, you evaluate. But the evaluation goes on throughout the process. Now, what I'd rather do with that paragraph, rather than just say that, if it has created some questions in your mind, ask me the questions. What does it look like when it says specific goals, timelines, designated responsibilities, anything in that raises a question in your mind? Because I want you to be able to go take this back home and explain it to your fellow layman, to your pastor. And so are there any questions that I can answer when you see that? Yes, sir.
Well, I had a comment actually. I think a lot of times when we're doing strategic planning, particularly in the church, where we see the church is getting older as far as the age of members, is inclusion.
Okay.
We need to put more inclusion as it relates to our younger congregants in our churches. A lot of times we exclude them.
Right.
When we look at a setting, even like today, on a professional level, they should be inclusive in that they can learn and draw from the wisdom and the experience of those like ourselves that have grown in the church. And I think a lot of times we're waiting for some type of conversion in our youth before we expose them to a lot of things, but actually go shoulder to shoulder.
Right.
When you have a person who's not knowledgeable or maybe ignorant to certain information, by them walking shoulder to shoulder, that correction process can take place through experience.
Absolutely.
And I think many times we fail our youth simply because we're waiting for a particular conversion for them to get it right, so to speak, before we include them in a lot of things. And I think what the church can learn is having more inclusion, more mentoring as it relates to youth, because if not, we're going to find ourselves, in situations where there's no one to lead the church in certain areas because of age and those types.
All right. So the takeaway from what he says that I want you to write down and take home is this. In your strategic planning, have some youth on that planning committee. And you ain't looking for somebody, as he said, who's perfect, been converted, whatever it is you think you're looking for. In fact, you need some on there that are really not in the church. Because they can help you understand why other people, their peers, are not in the church. And so you got to have some young people at the table, and you just can't have them at the table, but you have to give credence to their voice. Don't shut them down when they say something, but give them the space to say it and respect what they say. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, because I stood in what you said about your first church. It was in the country, you had to go down the dirt road.
Yes, sir.
To it. And you said that you only had 35 members.
Yes, sir.
And when you left, you had 250 members. Did I hear that right?
Okay, now when I left there, we had about 125, but I was pastoring two churches, and at that second church, I had 250. The one that we did tutorial program. Yeah. But what I would tell you now, yeah, we went from 35 to about 125. Yes, sir.
25. And I've been to your church, and you have a beautiful church. You have a tremendous congregation. What is your plan to bring all those young people in?
Okay.
What do you do? Maybe you can help us out.
Okay. Well, what I would tell you that all of that was a part of the 2020 plan, because when I went to Mount Zion was 300 people, and they were mostly old people. The pastor was 93.
Good.
And that's where I start with the plan. Part of our plan was this, to give the church a more diverse look. That was the plan. And so if I'm visiting the church, I look at the pastor and he's 93 or 63. There are people who are going to be attracted to him based on the age that they see. And then they're going to start looking around to see somebody who look like them close to their age.
Right.
And so you have to be strategic and make sure that you place people in place that represent every generation, whatever it is or whoever it is you want. You've got to have people in place that represent them so that they can see themselves.
Okay. But is that what you did?
That's what we did. Obviously I was younger, but I looked around, and so, all right, and so for example, the music that they were playing when I got there was more classical Christian music. And then they were real heavy into spirituals. But gospel music, contemporary music, a hymn, none of that. None of that. And so we understood then that there's a population that like that. And so we need to have an offering. It's church like a buffet. Everybody don't like fish, so you better have some chicken. Some people don't like fish and chicken, you better get some pork chop, beef. And so we had to then transition into music. And that transition was not easy, because there were people who said, I will not sing that kind of music. Musician says, I don't play that. So we had to get a new musician and all of that. And of course, that didn't happen the first year now. But you had to transition the music. And one of the things that helped me is this. There was some occasion during the homecoming festivities for Albany State. And the president had joined our church. And she came and she brought like the homecoming quarter and some other students. And so we are sitting there in church and the choir singing. And those children are falling out laughing at them. And I see it. And my music ministry see it. And I said, now y'all see what I'm talking about. But they were laughing at them.
And so you don't have devotion, you have praise.
We mix it up. Again, if there is over the years, we had the deacons had a Sunday, they come down and do devotion. The next Sunday you come, well, let me back up. When that devotion, it wasn't just deacon, it was children. They may be 8, 9 years old, standing there beside the gentleman we call senior deacon, who's 81. You had to mix it up. And so they did it, and then the children had, and then we had praise and worship, and now we're doing something where we have some people open up with devotion, and they can do a hymn, a song, a prayer, whatever. They're comfortable singing, and so it's a mixture.
Okay, and did you, then I'm not going to say anything.
Okay.
Did you say that the young people came in and were hearing the devotional and were hearing the song?
Yes, sir.
They relate to them, so they laughed at them.
Yeah, they laughed at those folk, and so we started getting some songs. And the gentleman on the back is one of those deacons. Now he's one of them that came. He was at the church I pastored before I came to Mount Zion Country. So those hymns and stuff, he devotion, he could do that. And so he and others taught the young people in our church, and he taught some grown men because they ain't never done it either. And so you transition. Yes, sir.
Pastor, when I'm hearing you speak, one of the things that sticks out, you're a planner, and you said something that was so important, that GPS brought you to the church. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying to us, people need to plan their work and work your plan.
Absolutely.
And if you want change in church, you got to become the change.
Right.
See, everybody won't change, but you got to be part of the change.
Right.
And I've always believed this, and I've always said, if you want a youth ministry, you shouldn't have somebody 80 years old doing youth ministry. They should be 40 and under.
You got it.
Because they can relate.
Got it.
So I like listening.
Yes, sir.
Successful.
Yes, sir.
People, you know?
All right. And now, and he opened it up. So let me just say it very gently. He said, if you want the change, you got to be part of. You got to be the change. And so what that means is you talk about how we transition. The elders in our church had to back up a little bit and give way to make room, to physically make room for somebody to come and do ministry along beside them. But the biggest thing was in their mindset. Because an 18-year-old or 30-year-old they don't think like an 80-year-old. And so when you start doing ministry with them, their ideas and the way they do it may not be like you think it's done. And there's something about every denomination, we think that whatever that tradition is, that's the way it has to be. Right. That if we've been serving communion this way, you can't change it. It's the only way it can be served. So-and-so deacon got to be on this corner and that one got, you got to be flexible. And I just use that, but whatever it is, there has to be some flexibility. Part of the change, going back, you asked me, was to use social media. Even before COVID and everybody started doing that, we were already doing that. And part of the way we were able to be successful doing that is in the strategic planning process, there were young people in the room. And so, for example, we send content out, daily devotions and sermons and songs and other kinds of things. And so the person who's in charge of that in the room, she was saying, well, I'm going to drop it at such and such a time. And then young person raised their hand and said, if you drop that at that time, no young people will read it. This is the time of day that we check our social media. This time of day, we're sleeping, we playing, we doing this. And all of us get on social media from this window to that window. So when do you think we dropped it for them? But the person who was in charge had no idea because she's not a part of that generation. So it's not just what you put, but when you put it out there. And how do you know that? Except you got somebody in the room that you're trying to reach. Other questions? Yes, sir.
This is a good one here, Pastor. In your teaching and preaching, you change, did you?
Absolutely.
You don't preach long no more. You try to teach and then relate, as you say. We need young folks in to relate to young folks.
Yes, yes.
So, from the pulpit, you had to do the change too, did you?
Yeah. I've been at Mount Zion 31 years, and there's this thing that I tell them, and they think it's a joke, but it is really not. But in 31 years, they've had 4 different pastors. I've been 4 different kind of leaders, 4 different kind of preachers, because as the church grows and evolves, the pastor has to become different. When I had 300 members, I could lead a certain way. I could be more involved. I could be hands-on because the ministry was so small. But the ministry is so big now, there's no way. And I'm not talking about, just people. I'm talking about what we are doing. We got 50 ministries that have nothing to do with what goes on inside that church. I can't be at all of that. But there are people who've been empowered. We have a major event coming up. This group called World Vision that we partner with. We got members in Ethiopia now on a mission trip, and some people are coming in, and it's going to be a major event. When is it? Because I don't even know. 27th of November. I talked with the leaders of that organization to agree to do it, and then I turn it over to him and his team. I won't talk to those folk again until they get to church. I won't know what's that going to look like until he report to me and tell me what it is. I can't do that because at the same time he's doing that, Saturday I got 2 other major events. The women got something called Sister to Sister. We're going to have 300 or 400 children at church on the 18th Saturday. I'm not in there planning. We planned that long ago as a part of our strategic planning. Now back in, there was a time when I would have been in there planning. I would have been in all the meetings. I don't do any of those meetings. Don't y'all tell anybody I told you this. I hadn't been in a deacon's meeting in 15 years. I don't meet with the deacon. I've got a leader now who manages that. And because the nature of the work of the deacons evolved, they don't need me in their meetings. He's their leader.
Yes, sir.
He's their leader. And don't mean now I'm not engaged and involved. I see it because there's a plan. And so, yeah. And let me get back to the preaching. And yes, the preaching has evolved.
Because you used to be like you did.
Yeah. Now, let me say this real quick. There's some men back there who've known me, my members, for a long time, and they can tell you, people say he can't hoop. I can, and I will sometime now. But I understand now that, especially with social media and I got 2 congregations, one in the virtual world and one that's in front of me, and I'm trying to reach a younger generation. It just takes a different style. So I've changed my style 2 or 3 times. I used to stand up on pews and all that kind of stuff. But a preacher asked me a question. He said, Reverend, why is it that I just attract a certain kind of people? And he described those people. I said, it's your preaching. You attract people based on your preaching. The people that come to Mount Zion, they like my style of preaching. There are folk who don't like it, so they go somewhere else. But my preaching is targeted for the folk I want. I want some young folk. And I want to be able to keep the older ones, so I'll give them what they're looking for too. But you got to target the church preaching ministry in such a way that it reaches the population you want. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, the thing that has been on my mind and heart since I have been in deacon's leadership is one thing I have learned as I watch people. Those who succeed in the ministry are those who are willing to change and adapt.
Yeah.
If you don't change and you don't adapt, then you're going to be stuck in the same place. So I would like for all of us to consider the ministry of change. Because if you are a born again believer, then you are a new person in Christ. So then the things we used to do, we don't do no more. But guess what? There are some things that we used to do, we don't need to be doing, but we change and adapt to a new way of doing it. And I found out that if you get from an early age, bring the children up in the church, you won't have to worry about no members, because we started out with teeny top choir.
Okay.
I noticed that in the church. The teeny top choir, and we have grown astronomically from that little choir because they all went through college and what have you, and bringing their friends through, and we're just growing in leaps and bounds. So you got to be willing to change, and you got to be willing to adapt to things that are presently going on today, not the things that was in the yesterday.
All right. Now, it's we got 5 minutes, so I'm going to take what you say and just share out of my experience with me and other people. Now, what he said is true about the change. But here is another key element to that. You've got to help people see change. Because sometimes we just change from one mess to another. But how impactful is that change? And the only way that you can do that is to be exposed to something else. You can't see what you can't see.
Amen.
You don't know what you don't know. And so you have to be exposed. I grew up in South Georgia, so churches for me, if somebody had 300 members, they were major. And if they had a budget of if somebody had $500,000 a year in income, they were just off the chain. And that's where my ceiling was, until God just orchestrated it and put me around some people, some pastors and churches who were doing things in ways that I'd never heard of. My daddy was a preacher, granddaddy, my brother who's over there. And so now I'm sitting in the church in a man's office, and he shows me his budget, and this is 1999, and for that year it was $3.2 million. And I said, you mean a church can have $3.2 million? He said, Simmons, you should have more than this. And at that point, mine was $500,000. So I went back home with a strategic plan. I brought him to Albany with a strategic plan and surpassed the 3 whatever. And as a part of that plan, because I didn't think like this until I got around him and some others. So we start talking about building the church that you're talking about. Folks said what I got now, but we didn't have those kind of members. He helped me to put a plan together to raise $5 million without selling chicken, without selling anything. And they're back there. And the people gave that $5 million. And so before a piece of dirt was turned, we had $5 million in the bank. And the people gave, and I ain't talking about 5,000 people, 306. I'm talking about less than 1,500 people in a 3-year plan gave $5 million for the building, not operation. They still giving to that because of a plan. I couldn't see that. And so you got to make sure you're exposed to something and that will help you see and make change that make impact. Nobody in our area had churches with members, with what we were thinking. And so you got to help somebody see. And I'm going to tell you something. One of the major changes in our churches, and I say this before them and after, happened when my deacons made a transition. When they came to understand that their job was not to supervise the pastor, that they were not in charge of all the other ministries and the vision of the church, that their primary job was not maintenance on a building. We got maintenance people to do that. The trustee's job was not building. We got people to do that, but it's ministry. And when they shifted from just the building and managing people and being in charge of everything, and understood what ministry and outreach were, and they got together on that, explosion happened. And they were empowered to do what really matters, and that's to do ministry. And somebody else can count the money. Somebody else can write the checks. Maintenance man come in and fix it and do a much better job than you, and then he's gone. Or if he's a member of the church and he can do it, but a whole ministry dedicated to the property. That one man back there, we got 109 acres of land just in one spot, and got land all over town. And the church sits on 17 acres, and that one man back there is in charge of that. I don't need a whole committee in charge of keeping up the law. That's a waste of talent. In terms, he can hire people, he can do whatever he wants, and we're gonna pay him. And so when you make that transition, what's bigger out there that you can be doing in your local church? And the president says it's time to go. And so I'll see y'all this afternoon in the discussions about ministry, your ministry, and the direction. And those discussions have to be candid, and that word candid has to do with you have to be honest. There has to be a culture within the church where you can talk and have these conversations without having to hold back truth. But you can speak it not in a confrontational manner, and you can disagree without being agreeable, without being disagreeable, and people can put their various thoughts and ideas on the table and nobody fall out about it. Because if you're in a meeting like this, getting ready to develop a strategic plan, and all yes men are in the room, you're not doing your pastor a favor. And if he doesn't say something back to you to question or challenge some of the stuff that you say, he's not doing you a favor either. You need greater clarity, and the way you get that is if I say something, let's talk about it. You'll have some questions that I didn't think of, and I'll give you an example. So this past year, our anniversary theme was preparing the next generation to be faithful stewards of Mount Zion's legacy. And the anniversary committee was having a meeting, and one of our young people walked by the meeting, looked in, and came straight to me and said, how are you preparing the next generation to be faithful stewards of Mount Zion's legacy? And there are no young people on that anniversary committee. I hadn't thought about it like that, and apparently the chairman didn't either. So that day, of course, I said, well, you own it now, and go get me some other folk. But had he not felt free to challenge me on that, and really, I consider it a good challenge, then I, never would have thought about it, and we would have missed that opportunity. And so you want to have honest conversation where you can give feedback. And again, the last thing your pastor needs are just yes men or women, and the last thing you need from him. And so you have that conversation, and then you come together in the group to start this strategic planning process. And going back to something somebody said earlier, you want to have an inclusive group, very diverse. And so if you're talking about Laymen's ministry, you want to have men in there who are currently in the ministry, but it is okay to get people who are not in the ministry to come in, especially people from different generations, different backgrounds, to come in and be a part of that conversation so you can get some ideas other than those that are in the room. Because in all likelihood, if you've been together 10 or 15 years in a group, y'all got groupthink, which means, you're pretty much thinking the same. So you want some ideas. And then you want to have some real deep discussions about the mission of the ministry so that you'll be on the same page when you start planning and setting goals about the mission. There's this man called Samuel Chan, and he tells this story as he talks about strategic planning of how these men were working on a house, painting the house, doing the roof, and did a fantastic job. And at the end of the day, the owner of the house came home, and they discovered that they'd been working on the wrong house.
Oh, yeah, have mercy. Have mercy.
And I'll tell you a true experience that happened to me like that. I came home one day, and I got a wooden fence on the main thoroughfare, and I looked over, and I could see a truck in my backyard, and one of my pine trees almost cut down. He had topped it out, and I said, "What in the world?" And so I pulled up in there, the man back there, got his truck and all. I said, "Hey, what you doing in my yard?" He said, "I'm cutting down the tree." And he said, I said, "Who told you?" He said, "That man over there at Mount Zion told me." I said, "Man over at Mount Zion?" "Yeah, the preacher over there at Mount Zion told me to come over here and cut his tree down." I said, "Well, what the preacher's name?" "Reverend Edmondson." Reverend Edmondson is one of the ministers over there. And so he identified himself apparently as the preacher at Mount Zion, and most people know where I live. So he just came to my house and cut my tree down. Good job, but wrong yard. And so sometimes you can be doing a good work, but it's the wrong house. You're cutting down a tree in somebody's yard you shouldn't be in. And so your house is your mission. And you need to be clear about what that mission is. And I'm going to go back and say something I said this morning. And I'm sure none of you in here had that problem, but you got some people who may need some help. Your mission as laymen, again, especially if you're deacons, is not to control the pastor and manage him.
Right.
When I first started preaching, the role of the deacon was to look out for the welfare of the church. That's not your mission. And so you need to know what the layman's mission is for your church. And there's some general things that all of us do, like I believe that every minister in the church ought to be engaged in evangelism, because that's a mandate for every ministry, for every church. You do the evangelism, the discipleship. But then there's some things specific to your church. I think that every church has a unique calling, and there's some things that Mount Zion won't do, that Unionville will do. And Unionville and Union Baptist and Macon, your pastors are best friends. They're like brothers, and y'all are sister churches. But your layman ministry can be different based on the vision and mission of the church. And so you need to have some clear understanding around mission and vision. And that mission and vision that you create for your ministry has to be aligned with the mission vision of the church. And that's where those conversations come in with the pastor, making sure that there's some alignment. So you get clarity around the vision, mission of the church, and then you create yours out of that. Because you shouldn't be doing anything that's contradicting the church. And then you come to the objective, the primary goals to accomplish. And in this strategic plan, you discover what are those goals. And again, these are the ideas. What is it as layman that you want to accomplish? Somebody give me a couple of examples of goals that you may have right now for your layman's department. Yes, sir.
Well, we have a mandate from Dr. Glover in our layman ministry to raise $2,000.
Okay.
Just so happened last night, I was talking to our past president about it, and we started playing it just like
okay.
right here. And
yes, sir.
I called and talked to him today. I said, "Man, what we talked about, you have already
Yeah.
prepared here. But one of the things, and then I talked about the global about it, one of the things that we talked, I advised him that is not to have a program because we can go to the individuals
Okay.
and reach our goal. That is the first thing
All right.
we want to do is reach out to the laymen themselves prior to doing anything else. Because you can reach your goal by going to each individual.
Right.
And we have almost 60-some churches.
Yeah.
So that, you can exceed that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's for you all's association. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that you will see in here is the goal has to be measurable. That's measurable. $2,000 is what you're going for. And so, yeah. And so that's a goal. That's the objective. You're clear. And then you develop the strategies for it. And the strategy, Dr. Glover, don't have a program, but let us reach out. Yes, sir.
Can I piggyback on what Mr. President said? We're trying to get all the churches to have at least one person at our meeting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the men don't say nothing about association meeting, the Laymen meeting.
Right.
And the leader, if he don't say nothing about it, they ain't doing it.
Yes, sir.
And so that's one thing we're trying to do. That's our goal, right there. This year, starting this year from now on, to try to get the track pastors tell their members about, especially the laymen, everything.
Okay.
About the laymen to come to the meeting. Because if the pastor don't say it, they're not coming.
Okay. All right. And what I'm doing is taking what you're saying and applying it here. So since that's the goal, then what happens is you all create a strategy. And it's a strategy that's in writing. And everybody who's a part of the leadership team, everybody who's responsible, they know what the strategy is. And that strategy has been worked out. And so if I meet you from one church or you from another church, everybody talking the same language. And then that next thing, tactics, the what, the where, and the when things will be done. The what is understanding to reach out to pastors, to encourage them. Where and when. Who's responsible? You say you got 60 churches. Who's responsible for each one of them churches, and do they know they're responsible? That's in the plan. When are they supposed to contact them? When are they supposed to report back?
And we doing all that.
Okay, yes, sir. So you, that,
We're doing all
yeah.
that, but it doesn't happen, it doesn't work.
All right. And so what you do then is, and if I, just, if y'all get tired of me talking about, these sayings and things that we do, y'all just tell me and I won't say it. So we have a saying at Mount Zion: don't tell me it can't be done. Just tell me you don't know how to do it. And so if that approach is not working, then you come back and there's another approach. And I'm on tape, so I hope that this doesn't offend anybody. And so I was pastoring over in another town, and so this lady used to visit us from this other church, and we became close, a family. And I would go home to eat dinner with him, and she had a gentleman friend. And when I would go there, he'd be sitting in the recliner and wouldn't move. She said, Pastor Simmons, I wish you could talk to him. He just not considerate at all. He don't help me do anything at the house. He won't come to church with me. And she just went on and on about what he won't do. And he just said, no. And Pastor Simmons, you know I like you, but just save your breath. Ain't nothing you can do. Well, time passed.
Yeah.
I went to another lady's house. He was sitting up in there.
She was sitting up in there.
I went there for dinner. Homeboy had an apron on.
What?
He was serving. He was washing dishes. And she talking about he denied she ain't never been a man like him. He cleaned, he cooked, he take out the trash. Anything I want, he try to do it. Apparently, that second one knew something. So don't tell me he won't. Sometimes it has to be another person. It has to be another way. And so that's what you back up to do. And one of the things you keep in mind, everything happens inside of a relationship. And so when you're deciding who does what, the relationship matters. You are with Dr. Glover, right? You were Glover. And so I had not been a part of any convention in a long time. And on a state level, had no plans of being in one. And Dr. Glover came to preach for me. And before coming, he said he needed to talk to me. So I invited him down to preach, and he did. And we went to dinner, my wife and his wife. And he said, Mike is considering running for president of the convention. Would you consider being his vice president? I said, now, Dr. Glover, you know I love you and got respect for you, but I ain't nowhere in the world. I don't want to be any president or anything in no convention. It just ain't gonna happen. You know, and that was just it. And then when they started this one, Glover came back to me again. And it's because of the relationship that Glover and I had. Had Mike called me first, this never would have happened. Because I didn't know Mike like that. Now, and there he is coming in the door. I love him now. I knew of him, but we didn't have no relationship. But Glover and I had a relationship through the relationship that he had with my brother and my daddy. And so I had respect for him. So sometimes it depends on who asked. So then I talked to Mike. I said, let me pray about it. But again, if Mike had come to me first, it'd been a flat no, and I went on about my business. So it's relationship. Somebody can get that pastor to do. And so that's that. Yes, sir. Yeah. And your ego have to get out the way, because I'm the pastor of Mount Zion. But I understand that if there's some people that I want to do something, I got to get somebody else to ask them. I ain't got no problem with that. And part of what I've done is I've learned my congregation. And so I know who I can say jump, and they're going to ask me how high. And I know some people I say jump, they're going to look at me, what the, you trying to tell me? and so it's all right. It's all right. But don't say it can't be done. You might not be the one to do it. You don't know how. And so somebody else, what's a goal that you have at your church?
What do you mean, as far as getting something done?
Yes, sir. As a layman, is there some goal that you are working toward?
I know we as things in our church, and I may be going off on the wrong end, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway.
You can say it.
The only way you can be wrong is to say what you say.
Yeah.
But we are actually trying to work on getting our pews replaced with chairs in there.
Okay.
Our goal is to get the pews out and to start working the chairs in to redo our sanctuary.
Okay. Yeah. Now, why did you think that was going down the wrong path?
Like I said, I'm still learning. I'm a work in progress.
Okay. All right. And so, again, just trying to help you understand how this thing working. So, in the planning, what all did you all consider when you were looking at putting a plan together to get them out?
And again, you know, as you say, you still have these old members in there that don't want to move because of the name. But and that's probably. But we all have considered, you know, every member making a donation to buy. You know, you ain't got to pay the full price, but to buy chairs to help replace the pews. Everybody, and then we just start making donation toward it, get other members, you know, just it's hard for me to say it right now.
Yeah.
We still haven't really got our plan together.
Okay. All right.
We just got it in writing right now, what we want to do. But like you say, it's a 3 to 5 year plan. We're not able to do it right away. But we're working toward that goal to get it done.
Okay.
So we can fix that problem, because our bench is probably older than me and you.
Gotcha.
know I'm pretty old, you probably.
Yes, sir.
Man.
No, okay. Yeah, flatter me. Yeah, all right. So let me ask you this. In changing the pews, what do you think would be the most difficult challenge? In change, yes. What's going to be the most difficult?
The difficult challenge is more, be honest, it's more about that our members that don't want them pews moved.
All right.
Because they have some, they have family that was there with the name on it. Because the name on it, they don't want that pew moved.
Okay.
Our family member bought that pew.
Gotcha.
You know
Okay.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And we can get the money, we can get enough people, donate. We may even have to start out with a small amount of chairs just to get started.
Yeah.
We're a small church, we're not a mega church.
Yes, you are. You are a mega church. I always correct people. The word mega means great. There you go. There you go. Yes, sir. That's all. That's all.
Well, we have a great pastor.
Yes, sir.
Great numbers.
Yes, sir. You're absolutely right. So, and I tell people that too. And so that's almost like saying we can't. They ain't got nothing to do with nothing. But let me tell you why I asked you that, because I figured that was going to be your answer. And so in a strategic plan like what you're talking about, when it involves changing something, whether it's the pews or something else, the first thing you have to do, for example, before you consider the cost and how you're going to buy the pews, your first challenge is, how do you get the people to buy in to what you're trying to do? And let me tell you something. The people are not mean and stubborn because they don't want you to take those pews out. It is not unreasonable for them to be attached to a pew because my mama's name is on it. My mama bought it. My mama and them sit there. I grew up sitting on that pew. You have to respect those feelings and the emotions and the connection and understand that there are different kind of losses. And so when those pews are gone, it's going to be more than the pew moved. They're going to grieve the loss of what those pews represent. They're going to grieve memories and connections to the church. Some people's connection to the church is, that's where my mama sit. That's why I'm still coming here. And so the trick now is, well, it's not a trick, but the strategy is, how do I address what they're feeling? Yes, sir.
And also, I know what you're getting ready to say, but I'm going to say that we had also got together and talked about what we'll do. The ones that are already the purchase pews, the nameplate that we were taking, when we came up with getting a big plaque and place the names on the plaque and put them outside where they'll still be noticed. And we're thinking, look, you'll see that before you see it on the side of the pew. How many of you all walk in, look at the side of the pew?
I do. If my mama name on it, I'm looking at it. And every time I bring a visitor to the church, I'm bringing them. Right. See that pew there? That's where my mama sit for 50 years.
Yes, sir.
And that plate right there means something to me.
Right. We're not getting rid of the plate.
Right.
We want to put it on the plaque outside.
All right. Let me share this with you. It ain't the plate.
That ain't gonna work.
It's the plate ain't the issue. You can put the plate on the wall. You still hadn't addressed.
Okay.
You got to deal with my feelings.
Okay.
You got to deal with my emotions. You got to bring me in a room and sit down and we have more than one conversation where I get to share with you what I am experiencing as you talk about that. And then you allow me to tell you what it's going to take for me to be okay.
Okay.
You allow me the validation of my feelings by allowing me to be heard and not offering me a substitute, because you insult me when you do that.
Okay.
Because you dismissed everything about me.
Right.
I'm crying. It's a loss, like a divorce, like death, and you're taking it from me.
Right.
And so I got a letter to this day. A lady wrote me when I got to Mount Zion, and we started, and this was about the 5th year, we started making some changes. And there was this program that she started around Mother's Day, and she wrote me a letter. Dear Pastor Simmons, I really admire you and what you're doing, and I see change coming. But I got one favor to ask. don't change, and she named the ministry, until I'm dead. Because if you change it now, it would kill me. She was serious. It would kill her. And so, instead of writing a caller, and I went and listened to her, she told me about her mama starting it, and she picked it up, and she about 90 years old, and she picked it up, and her children, and there's tears flowing down her eyes. And so I just validated, I understand, and I'm gonna work with you, and we ain't gonna do nothing to destroy that. And I got some ideas, and some other people got some ideas how we can improve it, but you're gonna be a part of any change that happens. Really? Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know what she called her boys and told them after that, but she got someone up in Maryland. He called me after that, said, Pastor Simmons, I appreciate your what you did for my mama. He said, now we've been talking, and part of what her issue is, she's worried about her and her mama's name being lost in the church and there. So I'm going to send you some money, and we're going to set up in perpetuity a scholarship and an award, youth award, in my mama's name, because that's what she's doing that for. And we worked with her, and that's what we did. And as pastor now, I was at a point I could have just told her, well, go on, call the cemetery. But it's acknowledging her feelings, and that's all these people want. They will give you anything, but they want to be heard. They want to be felt. And so in this business that we're in, it's not the building. It's not what you're doing that you got to deal with first. It's that human element.
Okay.
It's that human element. Somebody else, before I move to the next thing. Yes, sir.
When you say a goal, I think my goal probably a little different than what we have in California. They have a lot of gangs, Bloods, Crips, Pyrus, you name it. You know, you walk across the street, you got the wrong color, kids get killed. So God gave me a ministry. I work with the youth. And in California, a lot of the pastors, they stay inside the church because they're afraid to go outside the church because of the intimidation. So I'm like, Pastor, how could we build the youth department up if all we're gonna do is preach to the wall? Well, we're gonna preach and they're gonna come. Well, I'm a little different. So since he wouldn't go to them, I started bringing the pastors to the kids. You know, like I work with a lot of youth organizations. So, you know, I'm fighting with keeping the kids out of the gangs because why? The dad in the gang, the mom in the gang, so you got all that going on. I said, Pastor, you're the only person that they really have contact with. You the saving grace. So you bring the pastor out there, but after they leave, they run right back to the church. But I have a plan, and I'm trying to work it. So I started saying, hey, Pastor, let me bring the kids to the church. Well, the problem with that, you got Bloods here, Crips here. When they all get together, that's an issue.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So that was supposed to happen. So I'm trying to say, how do I get around that? Because to me, you let fear win. You know, if you say you love the Lord, and here, now young man, you're a deacon, I'm a pastor. You stay in your lane, I stay in my lane. But that just don't settle with me.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Because you got to reach these young people. In my business, Monday is the worst day because everything happened over the weekend.
Yeah.
I get on Monday.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? So how do, I guess this probably been going on before I got to LA, but how do you change that? You know, how do you change that? Get outside the walls, get into the community. Maybe it's a fear factor. I don't know. I don't know. I'm struggling with that.
Yeah. Yeah, you got some people that fear factor is real because you got some people who heard so much about the gang, some true and not true. They'd rather face a rattlesnake than get out there in that atmosphere. But I think that even with that, like I said, churches have different callings and different visions, and so you regroup. And I would pray that pastor would be on board with it. But here is the philosophy that I take to something like that. I don't believe in this notion that if you start doing planning for your church, that all the people at the table have to be a member of your church. And again, my members are in here, and we may have people from other churches, from the places. If you're the best person to help us, we want you at the table. And so out of that, I believe that the people who can best help you to figure that out is somebody who's been there, done that. Somebody who's been a blood, who's been a Crip, and can get in that room with you, and they may not even be a member of the church, may not be a member of anybody's church, but they understand that world, and they can navigate that. And then there's some, like in our town, we got a couple of police officers that's on the gang task force that actually have a relationship with them. And sometimes, they're able to get them to have a truce, to come together to talk. And another experience I've had, I don't know what it is in your city, but the Brothers in the Nation of Islam seem to have a relationship with them. And so I've gone through them sometime to have some conversations. And again, I ain't trying to be no Muslim now, but they were in a better position. So bring those people in that room, and they can help you develop a goal and a strategy to start working with them individually, bringing them together, and keeping the violence down. But don't stop. Yes, sir. You and I may not know how to do it, but somebody does, and I think that happens. Because a clear example of that, when we started our drug ministry, it was people in the church who had never been high, who had never smoked crack, who never been addicted to cocaine, who never been on the streets. And then that ministry was turned over to people who were in recovery. I got a son in ministry in Griffin, Georgia. You go to his church, and there's a whole section that is very diverse. They white, they black, they women, they men, they Hispanics, and they all got one thing in common. They're recovering addicts, or they're on the street. And their connection is to the pastor. For 20 plus years, he was out there with them. And he know how to get them, brother. He know how to talk to them. I can't get that crowd like he get them. But you go to his church, and they're in there, because that's him. And so find somebody to do that. One other person, then I want to move on in this. Okay, time is already, okay. So well, let me just say this. And so what you do, you get in the room, and you come up with these ideas, and you get these goals, and then you'll see spelled out in here. So one of the things you got to do is see what you currently have available to accomplish what you want. And one of the best tools that I found to do that is something called a SWOT analysis. Y'all ever, who heard of that? All right. So SWOT analysis is just it's a tool, a strategy to help you think through your resources. And that word SWOT, S-W-O-T. So it asks you to look at your strengths in the ministry. So that's what the S stands for. The W, your weaknesses. What are the weaknesses in your ministry? And all of us got them. And then the O stands for opportunities. What opportunities are out there that you can take advantage of? And then the threats. What outside of the church and inside is a threat to you and would hinder you doing what it is you're trying to do? Opportunities, all of the dysfunction that you see now happening in the world as a result of COVID. They're saying that our children are experiencing the worst learning loss, that we've seen all of the mental health issues that you are seeing occurring as a result of that. Domestic violence has gone up. Families start staying together, husband and wife spending time together, and so they got on each other's nerves and all this credit. Well, see, instead of crying about that, those are opportunities for the church to move into areas of ministry. And so, for example, we've started a mental health ministry because the opportunity is there. We've expanded what we do with children to learn. And what you also have to understand as a church, because when I say that you just don't count your budget, other people are turning over data, and they are looking at these opportunities created by dysfunction and whatever. And so the state, the federal government, they saw the learning loss as well. So guess what? The Biden administration sent money to every state to give to nonprofits, to churches like yours, to help with learning loss, for you to be able to get your children and other children to help them. And for a moment, that money was not being released. And so I won't call their name, but an agency went to the governor and asked for a portion of it, just $5 million. And when he saw their plan, he said, well, I got $15 million. And I'm going to give y'all the whole $15 million. And then that organization came out and partnered with churches. There's a man sitting right back there, is one of those partners. And they came in, and the people in this church got jobs. And the people who did the teaching to the children were paid $32 an hour. And they didn't have to contribute a dime. The director of the program, which was a part of his church, she was 30 plus an hour. And then the paras that they got, 25 an hour. And then they provided food and they paid for transportation. They did everything. His church became a vast ministry for children, and it cost them $0. And while you were counting if there's a vision, if there's a mission, if there's a plan, it will come to you. And so you look at those opportunities and you look at the threats, and they are threats. And if we don't address them, we are going to be lost. And let me just throw this out at you. Those of us who are not moving into the age of technology, even in your layman's ministry, then the threat that's out there is that everybody around you is taking advantage of that. And if you don't master that, then what's going to happen is your church will be left behind. Financial stewardship, this thing that he was talking about today. We're in a period when the generation that's coming behind you, they've not embraced and even not in a position to give as some of the elders before them has given. So you got to have a revenue stream to keep your church afloat until they catch up with you. And the kind of programs he's talking about is what happened. I don't do it as much now because they fell out with me, but I used to associate with a lot of our Caucasian brothers and sisters churches, and that's what keep them afloat. It was nothing for me to meet with them and say, well, we got a gift this weekend. One of the members died and he had a 300-acre farm, and they willed the farm to us, and so now we're going to sell the farm. Well, somebody died and we got $1 million policy. Or somebody died and we got $500,000, or somebody who's not dead. You know, they had all this money, they need to have some tax write-offs, and so they just, boom, sent all this money to us. Oh, you know, we needed a park, and so somebody strategically figured out how they could bless us, and we don't get that. It happens sometimes, but we got to start teaching and understanding that, and so there are all kind of opportunities, but we just got to know these threats are coming, and if you don't get that, my brother who's not in here, I told you when we built our church it was $5 million. Total cost of land and church and everything was $12 million, and he pastored New Jersey at that time. He came down and preached for me. Did anniversary. He looked around. He said, come here, let me tell you something. He said, look. He said, you see that generation that got you over here? He said, you see they're aging, don't you? And he said, if you don't get them to help you pay for this building by X date, that young crowd out there that's out there, they ain't gonna pay for it. I heard him loud and clear. And we went ahead and paid it off. Us took a check down there. Us started a campaign to pay it off, and he was right. And so when you see the threat, you don't run from it. You just plan and you go. And our time is up. But you've got the handout. Take it back. Study it. Call me if you got a question. Make sure your pastor sees it, and y'all talk about developing a plan to take the ministry anywhere. And again, different churches, different plans, but have a plan and work it. Thank y'all. So now.